Please welcome to the stage Amitava Kumar in conversation with Suketu Mehta, discussing, amongst other things, Amitava's recent book, Immigrant, Montana, a novel.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. तुम कुछ बोलोगे या मैं बोलूं? Wait for those folks who are in the wrong session, so let them go out first.
All right, yeah. Well, it's, thank you all for coming out. Can you hear me? Yeah. Let me go closer.
Or bring that.
All right, so this is, it's a thrill hanging out with Amitava again. We live not too far apart from each other in New York, and he comes to my apartment uninvited all the time. And stays over for the night. So basically, we're going to pretend as if we're in my apartment and are just having a chat.
But in that case, where is the wine? The third bottle.
You think that's tea? That's cognac. No, it really is. I've been listening to Amitava's stories as he's been writing this book, and it's a real breakthrough for him. It's won just incredible rave reviews in the New Yorker, the New York Times this weekend, all over the place. And what the reviewers have noted is that it is kind of genre bending. It's fictional, non-fictional, factional. It owes a lot to Teju Cole and Seabold, and it's got pictures, it's got bits of poetry. It's the full package. And what's really remarkable about it is that it doesn't have the standard 3-act plot. It begins somewhere and then wanders about and goes into these digressions about Henry Kissinger and a man who is thinly disguised, the great late Iqbal Ahmed, who taught at Hampshire College for many years. It's got this wonderful meditations on, on Osho. So above all, this book is funny. And I found myself just cracking up. It's a tremendous send-up of academic life, among other things. So I'm going to ask Amitava to begin with this wonderful section about the being called Osho, who was formerly called Rajneesh, and there's a Netflix series which is on about him called Wild Wild Country. So he's got a section about this.
Cool. It's an honor, for example, to be reading here, of course, but also to have Suketu here. Suketu, for those who have not read Maximum City, you should read. I think one of the best works of non-fiction in the past 2 or 3 decades, or longer if you wish.
Why limited?
Oh, yeah.
Not since Tolstoy.
Why limited? When he wrote non-fiction.
Oh, is that? Oh, okay.
You know what I both love and hate about my interlocutor is that stories happen to him. And if you are with him, then stories will happen to you. If you're not with him, you will lead an existence that is as dull and banal as mine. For example, since Suketu said that there are parts that are funny, which is very kind of him to say, I should also acknowledge that without in any way thanking him, there is one joke, for example, that I totally took from an email he once sent me. A woman asks my narrator there, by the way, what happened to your cousin? Where is she now? They're talking about a wedding. And so this is the part, and I hope you'll see where I have borrowed from Suketu. It says, she wouldn't have thought it a very big deal, so I didn't tell Jennifer that I couldn't even make it to my cousin's wedding. But I had felt guilty about it for years. I couldn't tell her that in a photo I saw of the ceremony years later, the sign that the painter had put up outside with a lotus flower and a colorful pot with a coconut on it also contained a spelling mistake. Rajesh wets Shalini.
It was a tweet that I of a
Someone had
photo.
written, instead of Rajesh weds Shalini, it was Rajesh wets Shalini. And I began to consider the semantic possibilities of that one word. I see that one of the guests has just brought her mother in, so I feel a little bit. Can you cover her ears? One of the most interesting words in the English language today is fuck. It is a magical word. This was Osho again, speaking out from the tape. How many of you know who Osho is, by the way, or was? All right, fair. Paul, you don't know who Osho was?
I mean, we're in Boulder after all.
Yeah. An Indian guru, who was also called sometimes the love guru, who was in Oregon for a while. And you have to watch this documentary, Wild Wild Country, you'll get a sense. All right, and then this was Osho again speaking out from the tape, and then there was a weird, quite exact, and also quite inaccurate, in fact, plain wrong listing of the usages of that word. Osho, in the manner of a school teacher, named the grammatical category and then provided an example. And each item was followed by uncontrollable laughter from his devotees. I heard the laughter and imagined half-naked hippies who had flocked to the huge ranch in Oregon, laughing with tears running down their cheeks. Transitive verb, John fucked Mary. Intransitive verb, Mary was fucked by John. Noun, Mary is the fine fuck. Adjective, Mary is fucking beautiful. Ignorance, fucked if I know. Trouble, I guess I'm fucked now. Fraud, I got fucked at the used car lot. Aggression, fuck you. Displeasure, what the fuck is going on here? Difficulty, I can't understand this fucking job. It was weird and incoherent, but my friends were laughing. Here was an example of what Americans meant when they said, it is so bad that it is good. Every now and then, we would press the play button and listen. For weeks, my office mates, we are talking here of a teaching assistant office. For weeks, my office mates tried to speak like Osho. It was funny, because it was Osho, the small-town Indian accent mixed with a ready report on American idioms. That was part of the humor. As was the fact that here was a spiritual leader holding forth on the word fuck. And then there was that part too, which was surely present in the reaction of my friends, about how banal it was in the end. They were laughing at the fact that something quite stupid was actually succeeding. It was fun. Example, surprise. Fuck, you scared the shit out of me. Let me stop on that section there. We have given a sense of what is going on.
I'm glad you read that out because so Osho was a professor of philosophy.
He was.
Right, at Banaras Hindu University, and he was a Jain.
Yes.
And then he came over here, and then his life just shows that you don't really have to make shit up. It was such a bizarre life. This guy from Banaras comes to America and really achieves the American dream. He buys a substantial portion of Oregon, along with
22 Rolls Royces.
Well, I thought it was 54.
No, on the documentary at least, a journalist says, if he's a spiritual leader, why does he have 18 Rolls Royces? And Ma Anand Sheila, his secretary, says 22.
But when they're all white, all of the Rolls Royces were.
Oh yeah, yeah, many.
They were all white, and then each morning he would decide which white Rolls Royce to take to the office. But he had this sense of humor, and so a lot of incredibly intelligent people flocked to his ashrams in Pune and
right.
Oregon because of this. And so when you put a character like this, and here he's not really fictionalized, how do you decide what part of a book you make up and what you just take from real life?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, my book actually, whether you call it fiction or non-fiction, whatever, started with my desire to write about one character, a real person. His name was Iqbal Ahmed. He was born in a village close to my own in India. As a young man, he saw his father being killed because his father was distributing land following Gandhi's advice that landowners should get rid of the land. And then, this was when he was 5. When he was a young teen, he trekked across India because he was going to Pakistan, which had just been formed as a new nation. And John Berger, wonderful, wonderful writer, actually wrote about that early part of his life, that part. What happened to him later was what I was interested in writing about, and which was that he gets a scholarship, a Rotary scholarship, to come to this country And then he gets a call to go to Princeton. From Princeton, he goes to Tunisia to do his doctoral work. He gets involved in the Algerian struggle. He's a friend of the Palestinians. When he comes back in the 70s, the Vietnam War is raging, and he falls in with the Catholic Brothers and is indicted for conspiring to kidnap Kissinger. Cool? A remarkable life. People like Edward Said, Noam Chomsky have dedicated their books to him, and still he remained relatively obscure. Certainly no one knew him in the part where I'm from and where he belonged. So I thought I would write about him. But then, Suketu, when he writes his nonfiction, he becomes friends with his subjects. He spends years, When he spoke about my spending time in his apartment, once I was in his apartment when a woman called to ask if he could help her move, and he was going to rent a van or... Actually, no, he was going to use the car which he bought with the money from the maker of Slumdog Millionaire, now I remember. Dirty spoils of war, and help her. But in my case, I went and spoke to Iqbal Ahmed's widow, the woman he was in love with when he died, his daughter, his former students. I didn't get enough, so I thought I would make it into fiction. Huh? And in that case, the parts I chose about his life were those where I could think that in opposition to the younger people in the novel, who had messy lives, I don't know about all you enlightened people, but when I was young, everyone was in love with the wrong person or looking for the right person. It was an endless confusion. You know what I'm saying? So how to have, in this swirl of confusion, someone who, as a teacher perhaps, is a moral center. So I chose those parts of Iqbal's life to put in the novel, which should illuminate a certain sense of, cosmopolitanism, also an awareness of politics, where the novel is set, the war is going on in Iraq. So what were his views on that, that sort of thing. That's how I chose it. And I didn't choose, for example, to have long passages on his interest in Gandhara art. I didn't think that was important.
So the research you did on Iqbal Ahmed was just looking through his writing and interviewing people who were close to him or students of his.
Yeah, I went to his village just to see where was his father killed. What are his relatives doing now? And it was very interesting that his cousin, an old woman, now in 80s, was deaf, and she believed that that her cousin was still alive. She also wanted me to know if I was a journalist, and when I said yes, she asked me if I worked for a newspaper. The newspaper she mentioned it was a newspaper I was familiar with in my childhood in Bihar, but it is a newspaper that has not been published for the last 40 years. But it was a discovery of, folks inhabiting a different time, almost, and just entering that, and having that, and then coming back to New York, on the campus where these kids are and where Iqbal is, or the Iqbal character is seemingly teaching, and using a little bit of that. So, for example, I went to the Columbia University Library and just wanted to read, when the Iraq War was starting, the first Gulf War was starting, what were the protests on campus? And, the writer Grace Paley had spoken there. And that's a writer I love. So I just copied down everything from the newspaper and turned it into a little speech in my novel,
Can I tell a Grace Paley story?
Please do.
So she was, for me, when I was learning how to write, I read her books like a textbook. She was incredibly funny and incredibly wise about love. A revolutionary and also one of the kindest people that I've ever met. So
that's very surprising, because I don't think you have learned anything about love.
I tried. So she lived in the West Village in the bad days in New York.
That's true.
And one day she was at home, and a young Puerto Rican burglar broke in through her kitchen window and tied her to a chair in the middle of her kitchen and started going around her apartment stealing things. And Grace, from her chair, says, "Have you eaten? There's food in the fridge. You look like you're hungry. Just, you can do your work later. Just have something to eat, then go. It's fine." And, she just kept hectoring him to eat. And finally he got sick of it. "Lady, shut up!" And then he fled through the kitchen window, taking very little because he was just sick of Grace's exhortations to eat. Anyway, so there's a section about Grace here that she's addressing a teacher, and I think you really got her character there.
Yeah, there's a wonderful thing she said. She said, if we need fuel, all our needs for fuel can be fulfilled by the fuel that is available, in the amount that is available. The only reason for invading another country like Iraq is because you need fuel for war. In other words, war, it's only because, and she described in her speech, I don't remember the figures, how much fuel a tank needs to go even 10 feet. And she said, only for war do you need so much of fuel, and therefore you have to have war in order to feed that war, and this process will go on till we resist. And I thought I should have it there.
Yeah. Yes. So
You saw that both mention of sex and war gets a good response in
okay,
in
let's
Boulder.
turn to sex. let's stick to this. So the novel is told one way of looking at it is through Kailash's love with three women, Jennifer, Nina, and Chai Yan. And as I was reading it, I was struck by the hot bits. So if Amitava and I both grew up in India, and if you go to any library and pick up a book like this, it'll automatically fall open to the hot bits. So writing about sex is one of the most difficult things to pull off, as it were, because it describes something which, on the face of it, looks really ungainly. John Cheever once said he couldn't write about sex because it is like jack, wrench, screwdriver, and hubcap, the changing of a flat tire. So I'd like Amitava to read out some of the good bits, the way he's dealt with the consummation, because it's really it's hard to do it without, if it's not for prurient interest or if it's not just out and out comical. He's threaded the needle over here,
so to speak. My narrator doesn't have the knowledge about sex that both Suketu and I possess, so he's fumbling towards a certain knowledge. And one of the things that helps him is something that I certainly didn't have when I was young and capable of having sex. Though, the train would bring me from Patna, where I'm from, it's a provincial town, to Delhi, where I was studying, and all the way to Delhi, on the low boundary walls, there would be advertisements for sex specialists. And always the dire situation that presented itself in front of my eyes was this thing like, do you have premature ejaculation? Call, blah, blah, blah. And I imagined a whole generation of uncertain men and disappointed women, etc., etc. You know what I'm saying? And so these days, what you have, which we didn't have when we were young, is a sex specialist. So in my novel, my narrator comes to this country and hears Dr. Ruth on the radio, who incidentally sounds like Kissinger. Her politics and her sex politics are entirely different from him. I stole a line from Joseph Heller to describe Kissinger here, because Joseph Heller wrote something where the first line was, even that fat little fuck Henry Kissinger is writing a book of poems. I thought I should steal that, and so I've put that in. It's just like Suketu's joke. I've put it in without attributing it. So I just want to, if you don't mind, before the parts that you would have found out, I just want to read to you about the general ignorance about sex. And so a question, I haven't invented this. I've just taken down the question that is asked of our sexpert, who is incidentally 93 years old and doing a great job. As President Trump would say, he's doing a great job. Frederick Douglass is doing a great job. But this guy, unlike Frederick Douglass, is alive. Question. My girlfriend kissed the tip of my penis and next day she suffered a stomachache. Could she be pregnant? Should she take some pills? Answer. She must have had dinner afterward and that probably led to the stomachache. Oral sex does not cause pregnancy and she did not take any pills. Question. I'm a 25-year-old man. Please tell me if regular masturbation can increase the size of one's butt. Answer. Just as your nose, fingers, and tongue will not increase in size, neither will the butt. Here's the photo of Dr. Ruth. Here's the photo of Dr. Vatsa. That was his name. When it comes to sex, my partner allows me to use only a finger for just a few seconds. Please tell me why. Also, when I hold my bowels for too long, my testicles swell and hurt. What could be the reason for this? The good doctor, the sexpert, had once again exercised a grim matter-of-factness, the humor in his eyes hidden behind the thick glasses he wore in the grainy photograph. Answer, she's probably scared by your intentions. Pregnancy or an infection, why not ask her? And do you mean balls? Bowels refers to the intestines. Why would you want to hold them? Please explain. All right. Suketu, man, I don't know. You're embarrassing me by making me read this, but I don't know. How you guys doing? I mean, isn't it too early in the day to be talking about sex? No? Okay. Whoa! Lady! Suketu, take the phone number. Oh my God. One day, Nina and I met in a film seminar that first semester. She had short-cropped hair, large brown eyes, and impetuous lips. Her movements were full of allure. She was small-built and athletic, a dancer till her late teens. Even when she was not moving, just sitting in the dark, watching the films that were screened for us in the small classroom, I was always aware of the outline of her features. Sometimes, instead of watching the film, I'd study the light on her face. We had spoken a few times in class, and once, after a party at Peter's, I trying too hard to be witty, and she managing to be so quite effortlessly. One day after the screening of Sidney Lumet's Dog Day Afternoon, I saw Nina bent over the water fountain. She raised her face, her mouth still wet. I wanted to ask you something, I said to her. Nina laughed. You want to know whether I'm fertile? Although she was laughing when she said this, her look was calm and assessing. I too laughed. There was a great deal of nervousness in my laughter because I didn't know what to say. No, I told her. I only wanted to know whether you're going to register for Comp Lit 300 next semester. As a matter of fact, I am. How can I not enroll in a course that appears on the transcript as Clit 300? More laughter. The following week, in the film class, we were discussing Nagisa Oshima's In the Realm of the Senses. The professor was a small French woman whose face and neck would get covered in hives if you asked uncomfortable questions. An Italian girl was making a convoluted argument about Japanese cinema. She had recently watched a film about a nuclear explosion on Mount Fuji. Nina was sitting in a chair next to me. I remembered the haiku about the cuckoo that Jennifer had given me. It is a haiku of Basho's that is mentioned before. Whenever I'm in Kyoto and hear the cuckoo call, I miss Kyoto. I wanted to write a quick haiku, but not about the cuckoo's lonely call. My fascination with Nina demanded a riskier expression of love. I passed a scrap of paper to her. On it I had written, wet moss between your thighs, semen rains on Mount Fuji.
I missed that in Basho.
She surprised me by putting a small tongue out as if she was licking ice cream. I don't know, man.
All right.
Well, that's not a sex act, I know. But,
Yeah, that's fine.
but it's all about language.
we'll
You
keep
don't
it
understand what I'm
PG
saying. Paul, you know what I'm saying.
So the reason I asked you is because it's the most pedestrian act. I mean, everyone does it. We're all here because of it, because someone did it in your past.
You're so wise. I love that about
Thank you. I remember a dedication that a common friend of ours, who I will not name, had to his parents in his book, and the book ends with, "And to my parents, without whom I would not be." So true. Right. But the reason I'm asking it that it is, it's a bold book to write these days, and it's yeah, how do you write about male desire in a time where it's th- the conversation is
Some
about
people
how
are having
fraught it
more
is.
fun there than we are. What are they doing?
Let's bring them out here.
Okay. अच्छा हम बता.
Yeah, when you were writing it, were you concerned that it would be interpreted in ways which you didn't mean? Um, what was the reception of the good bits in your novel? Were there people in other readings and reviews or and particularly South Asian male desire, which is horrific things happen to women in India.
Yes.
And your book really gets to something, this conflict in Kailash's desire, the place he's grown up, the dirty jokes that his friends revel in his dorm, and then he comes to America, this land of, well, sexual availability, and how he negotiates it is really, I thought it was very well done, but also risky. So I'm just wondering if you had alternative approaches, what you're thinking about it now, would you have still written it in the same way?
Oh, you mean the Me Too movement or something?
Yeah.
Man, I was Me Too before Me Too came. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, I must talk about desire, because by repressing desire, you do not address the problem. And however, how to always address the issue of sexual violence. So it is the sort of a dark underside, even as there is this laughter or celebration or evocation of desire, which I wanted to talk about in real terms. But never forgetting what is also sometimes done in the name of desire. So, after a certain age, you don't care about what people think. You know what I'm saying? I thought, what is the thing to do? How to write, frankly, both about ignorance and about discovery and delight. I mean, one of the things that my narrator is worried about, of course, is that in time you forget, the body forgets. The body forgets even what is most intimate to it. And I thought, before I become too old, I should write about the thrill I felt in love, or when bodies met, and to celebrate it, while at the same time, of course, in any honest act, to point out other things that happen. One of the stories I tell here is something I'd touched upon in an earlier story too, where, like in all my other books, Suketu is also invoked. So in that story, in a book called Bombay, London, New York, I had translated a poem by a Hindi writer, which is called When a Girl Runs Away from Home. And it's a sort of an anthem of independence. Cool? Now, when translating that poem, somewhere around it in a footnote or somewhere there, I mentioned how a cousin of mine, living in a village, child of, illiterate peasants, my father's first cousins, had an affair with an older man in the village. And then she was killed. And so I thought, I'd written this much about her. And I thought, when writing in this, I should go at a greater length. So I called up my sister, just to ask, what happened to Sunita? I'd seen her as a young girl in my village all the time. Her brother was, arrested a few times for small acts of burglary. And that family was always a reminder to me of what learning does, or literature does. Because my father began to learn to read, and he was the only guy to come out and get a job. So that's about class also, and that violence of lives being, lived through in deprivation, fighting for small spoils. In any case, and when I called my sister, I discovered other things, about what had happened to Sunita. And I thought I should put it right there, even as we have just finished another chapter of a guy falling in love with someone and having sex, just so that is interwoven. And that I thought that's the rhythm of life almost, You have some happiness, and then there is unhappiness, and then you try to find some other happiness. And that's what I try to do.
So much of the book is addressed as Kailash, the narrator. He addresses an invisible judge, sort of beseeches him. And it is called Immigrant, Montana. So, talk about well, the themes of exile and longing in the book. There's this wonderful account of communication that the narrator has with his parents, the long distance calls that they have to book, which is anyone who's grown up in India, when all the phones went through the state telephone monopoly, you'd get cut off at 3 minutes, and then the operator would butt in and ask, continue, continue, and then you'd have to say whether you wanted to pay some more. So my father, who lives in New Jersey, still raises his voice on long-distance calls from New Jersey to New York. But there's many details of this communication from Bihar to America, and the narrator's sort of fluid and shifting position in the country, and it ends with a citizenship ceremony. Yeah. Why do you write all that?
Well, yeah. Well, what happened was, I should tell you, I don't know about you guys, but I'm always speeding on the highway, and always a continuous dialogue goes in my head with the cop who's going to stop me. So what's going on in my head is something like right now, if I were to think about, if I were to be silent for a second, I would have a little commentary going on about the people I see. And like, your face looks familiar to me, I've seen you before, the long-haired gentleman, yeah? At this place, maybe, you know? So there would be a thing about those, I saw a man, he was he has a longer hair, blah, blah, blah. So in that same way, there would be this thing that went on in my head where I was accounting to the cop, like why I was speeding. Now, it so happened that I went for a citizenship ceremony and I had the flag next to me that was given to me after the ceremony, and I was driving home when a trooper passed me very fast. And I thought, what would happen if he had stopped me and said, why are you speeding? And I would have said, because this story goes on in your head, I would say, officer, can I just tell you, I just became a citizen. So, and how would I explain that? And would he be happy about that? And I didn't know, so I went home and just quickly wrote a story about it. Cool? And then I put it here because I thought, why don't I read that? Do you mind?
Yes, please do. It's a lovely scene.
लंबा है थोड़ा सा लेकिन
छोटा कर दो.
This is like a story from Manto in Partition. लंबा है थोड़ा सा, छोटा कर दो. It's about murder. अच्छा चलो भाई. In the car, certificate in hand, I wished I had eaten lunch before coming. I hadn't driven further than 2 miles on I-84 when I saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser behind me. The cop was an elderly man with a thin mustache. When he asked for my license and registration, I picked up the US flag and certificate and showed them to him. Officer, I've just become a citizen. Only 10 minutes ago, I was rushing home to tell my wife. Did you also get your license today? No, sir, I've been driving. No, I didn't get it today. Then I won't be needing these. Your license and registration, please. So that did not happen, but it happened in my head. The ticket he wrote was for $165, which is exactly what I got in another. I thought he had behaved fairly and hadn't questioned the lie about my having a wife. But I was also suspicious that I had been punished for having become a citizen. As I proceeded to my house, driving under the speed limit now, I thought of Jennifer with gratitude. She had taken me to the DMV in Harlem in her old blue Volvo. I had been living in the United States for only 4 or 5 months by then. I drove her car for the test. The man who was the examiner turned out to be a Pakistani. I was afraid he was going to fail me. As I followed his instructions, please change lane, turn left, park on the right, etc., the thought came that I should get on friendly terms with him. I tried to make small talk. Where are you from in Pakistan, Mr. Abid? Do not talk, he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Please drive. When the test was over, he said that I had made one mistake, but I had successfully passed the test. I said adab to him. We shook hands. Jennifer said that she was quite sure, even when she had picked me up that morning, that I was going to get the license. Then she laughed and said, I became certain when I saw that you were going to be judged by your brother. Or पढ़ता रहूं ये?
Yeah, a little bit more.
That far-off winter day came back to me in the car when I was given the ticket after the citizenship ceremony. More than 2 decades ago. Must have been a day in early December. To celebrate the fact that I now had a license, we went for lunch to an Indian restaurant on Amsterdam Avenue. I was talking in Hindi to the Punjabi woman who was the owner, and Jennifer joked that after I had had my fill of white women, I would return to India to live there and enter an arranged marriage. She imitated a head wobble and began to laugh loudly. She shut her eyes and her mouth formed a rictus. Her face had turned red. I had no idea where this sudden bitterness was coming from. Her behavior was unusual, but it probably made me think that this was the real Jennifer. It is possible that that was the moment when I began to move away. So, Jennifer, I don't have an Indian wife. And actually, I'm a citizen now. This is not to say that you were wrong and I was right, but simply that nothing turns out the way we imagine.
Beautiful. All right. So we have time for some questions.
Comments?
Well, I would like to hear more about the subcontinent desire of men. And I meant in a good sense. You said there were horrific things that happened.
Yeah.
But are you guys just more sexy? What's going on?
Well, opinions differ.
This touches on a very live subject for me. Every time Suketu has a new girlfriend, which is fairly often,
Yeah, right.
I wonder, why didn't she ever fall in love with me? I'm also a writer. I speak fairly good English. But also, more importantly, I think, what is it about Suketu? So I don't know. It's a mystery. So that's my fair answer.
So
Or Suketu's dear friend, Salman Rushdie. I mean, he's a wonderful writer, but you go to a party and everyone is in love with him. And I wonder, what does he have that we don't have?
A fatwa.
That's a great word. The allure of danger.
No, I think it is an important question. This, not
The
why are we
fatwa was
so
the
sexy, but-
sentence that the Ayatollah had passed on. Yeah. Death sentence.
It's so the one book which I think does this male desire really well is a wonderful book called English August by Upamanyu Chatterjee. But that book is, it's the Indianest novel written in English.
Bilkul. Wonderful novel.
And it's a touchy subject because it's, and this one of the reasons I admire Amitava's book, because I think it should be more explored, because this is how we deal with all the stuff that's happening in India. I mean, there's massive changes. The Supreme Court just lifted the ban on homosexuality, which the British had imposed after hundreds of years. There were friends of mine who were involved in the legislation. So, I mean, there's a lot of sex happening in India. There's 1.2 billion people. It's the Kama Sutra came from there, but also the horrific Delhi rape cases. So I think, more writers should essay this subject, even at the risk of falling flat on their faces. And people are just, male writers particularly, are afraid to go there.
I agree. Or maybe just talking, Immigrant Montana, the title is a hashtag fake news. Because it suggests that this book is about Montana. It's just minimally so, in the sense that it is true that, like my narrator, one day I heard the name Immigrant Montana on NPR. And Leanne Hansen, the woman presenting the show, said, Wolf number 3 had been killed in Immigrant Montana. And I heard it as Immigrant Montana. Research revealed that it's actually Emigrant Montana. But then when an Indian newspaper asked me to cover the Democratic Convention in Denver, where Obama received the nomination, I immediately said yes, because I knew that I could go up then after the convention to visit this place and construct a story around it, you know? So there is that bit there, and the narrator goes there, and before that, the narrator and his girlfriend go to Yellowstone. Alas, I went alone to Yellowstone, but I used it in the book to produce that story. There was a hand at the back when I started speaking. Yes, sir.
I'm of Indian descent, never lived in India, so a lot of the contents and the subjects are not as familiar to me. But I find that Indian men do not know romance. Is that a good subject to talk about?
Well, if you've seen Bollywood movies and Shah Rukh Khan in action, I don't know, what do you think about Indian men and romance? Because you actually do deal with this, the very hesitant, fumbling way in which Kailash approaches these women, particularly with Jennifer, the first of the women in the book. It takes a long time before they actually...
But that's because of the romance, actually. Because of the romantic nature. We have been, as children of Bollywood films, we have learned to sentimentalize everything. You know, I can say for a fact, in my own case, you know, not that I was very lucky in love or had many dates or anything, but I couldn't go on a date without immediately thinking about marriage. You know, stupid, I know, but that's what you're trained.
Yeah.
Do I love her? Do I love her completely?
Will my mother
Will I love her forever and ever? Is how I confronted, and therefore I did not proceed too far, in my opinion. You know, because imagine going on a date and saying to someone, you know what, I really like you, I think we should get married. A woman will say, are you fucking insane? Who do you take me for? You know what I'm saying? So, but it is actually because of romance. It is the idea of a romantic notion of how you will love someone, you love them forever, and I don't know, how your pleasurable acts will populate the garden of her fantasies. Or something, you know what I'm saying?
But also in Indian poetry, myth, religion, there's no division between religious stories and love stories. The bhakti bhajans, the Sufi ghazals, they're all about impossible love. So there's that tradition, and then there's that other tradition of shame, of sexual violence.
And
then
I've plumbed both of those in the book. I mean, not in my life. No, I think if I could just say one thing about that, it is also a conflict between the grandiloquent idea of romance, where a man builds the fucking Taj Mahal because he's in love, and in opposition to that, someone wanting to populate the one-room apartment of his middle-class soul with an idea of romance and do it on a daily basis in a way that is not magnificent but mundane. You know, that is it. That is the conflict that has to be addressed.
Can you speak to the role of sort of Victorian English morals and how that has contributed to the general sexual repression, and do you think that contributes to what India is going through now?
very much, right? I mean, I'm no historian, but there's lots of research on the subject. You know, they came there, the British, and they brought their own idea of how people should do it. Remember, these were people who covered piano legs in their home country because they thought the legs might trigger off people. Which is not to say that there wasn't any kind of sexual hypocrisy before the British came, but they actually made laws about it for the first time and made it so when the Mughals were ruling, I mean, there was one set of laws for them, and then all the religions had their different religious codes. They didn't really try to impose it on the whole rest of the population, otherwise we'd all be Muslim. But the British really had strong views, particularly about homosexuality, so they actually criminalized it. And it also sort of seeped into things like the the police force. So there's, I've spent a lot of time with the police in Bombay. There's a friend of hers, Anu Rao, who's written a really landmark study of the police in Maharashtra in the 19th century, the British police, and there's passages about sexual violence. So it went hand in hand, the brutality of the empire and hypocrisy around morals. They were simultaneously tantalized by, for example, all the carvings that see on the temples in Khajuraho. I mean, E.M. Foster's Passage to India has this memorable passage about it. And repulsed by this kind of oriental pullulation. So it led to this, I think, a culture of sexual corruption. What do you think?
Yeah, prudery. And the absence of any genuine exploration. I think there's violence also because it's not sex as something that's not accepted as a part of everyday life and discourse. And that leads to such, I think, also to othering of women, violence against them, especially in villages, etc. That's happening now and then. The Delhi rape case, people moving from the provinces as a result of increasing globalization, industrialization, modernity, and almost a sort of a pre-modernity clashing in the cityscape.
Well, and also the Bollywood films that we grew up on, you couldn't even show a kiss on the screen, but you could have a rape scene that lasted for 10 minutes. So basically, when people went to the movies to get turned on, they got turned on by watching women get raped. And it just went on and on, these things. They're horrific when you look at them now. But that's the censors would allow that and not a kiss.
I have a question about the structure of the novel. So it's obviously organized around relationships, but there are also sort of a bunch of associative leaps that you make. Yeah. And one of the pleasures of reading it for me was seeing like Dr. Ruth next to a few 100 pages away from Hardayal, and sort of figures who don't normally share space. So I wonder if you could just talk about how you thought about structure.
Yeah. Books evolve out of a long, I don't want to sound pompous, long contemplation. So when I was going for my very first job interview, I took out a reporter's notebook. I was in an Amtrak's train, and I wrote a line. It said, "The red-bottomed monkeys would come down from the tamarind trees and peel the oranges left unattended on Lotan Mamaji's balcony." Cool? Just an image. But a few years passed and I made that into a short story. And then I was in India and there was one little mention of how the monkeys that were running through Delhi, a primatologist had there said that we have for so many decades exported so many monkeys to America, male monkeys, that it has caused a social fission. Cool? So I grasped that. I thought, okay, so there was a monkey in my memories, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So monkey as a symbol of migration. So I then began researching and I found that, okay, space travel, monkeys were sent first, So Indian monkeys, you know what I'm saying? Before Neil Armstrong, Indians were there. Little stories like that just began to grow. And I thought, for example, 10, 15 years since Jhumpa won the Pulitzer for Interpreter of Maladies, there's a story which is based on her father's arrival here. And he has come here on the day man has landed on moon. Cool? And his landlord says to this new graduate something about man landing on the moon. And Jhumpa's story ends by the young man lying in bed thinking of that strangeness of that journey, but also reflecting on how huge his own journey has been. Actually, from India to here, for him, is more challenging in some ways than Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. Cool? So I thought how to make the monkeys how to queer, if that's the right word, Jhumpa's narrative by making not about men or women, but about the monkey itself. How much courage must it have taken for a monkey which has the intelligence of a 2-year-old to be strapped and to be sent. And compared to that, my narrator feels he doesn't have enough courage. He honors the monkey, especially because a Republican senator had called an Indian guy a Democratic supporter, a macaca. So all of this was going on, But so the idea was how to put the monkey thing in the beginning, for example, and then have something else about the monkey a little later, and then have this sociological explanation yet again, so that the story gathers strength and you're getting more and more and more. And I therefore thought that the other strains could also be organized in the same way. Someone has come here, but then you have Ehsan's, the teacher's earlier travels as a contrast. And then you go further ahead and think of this Chinese woman who has come to America, but then because she knows that Maoism has been strong in India, she goes to India. So I was hoping, rightly or wrongly, that the structure was such that the stories, things that had been planted earlier, were gathering a different meaning. Their significance was being amplified. And perhaps what you had then was something that was more vivid suddenly, like, I don't know, blood on the sink or something, like poof, that way.
All right. I think we have time
That's
for one
propaganda,
last-
propaganda.
I've read a fair number of novels by Indian female authors, but I haven't read a lot by Indian males. And I find a discrepancy or a gap between your image of romantic Indian males and the ones that I've seen portrayed by female authors. And I wonder what you have to say about that gap in the portrayal.
Did you have a particular author in mind? That's a little bit too general.
I'm thinking about, let's see, so I thought about what's the name of it? The Space Between Us. I'm thinking about Desai. I'm thinking about, what's the one with I can picture the cover of it. A series of short stories with somebody upstairs. They're more traditional in India stories, and yours takes place in America, and I wonder if that's part of the reason why, because these are based more on traditional Indian males, and maybe that isn't where you're coming from. Let's see, who's the other one? I can't remember the name of the author.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'll tell you something. क्या हो गया? Okay, great. I was once interviewing women in a riot-torn camp in Gujarat, and I wrote about this young woman saying to me that they were all being married off while they were in the... I couldn't understand why were weddings taking place in a riot camp. Does that make sense to you also? You don't have a place to stay. You're all put into this terrible, cramped, bad-smelling place. You have lost your home. Why the hell are you having a wedding? That was my question. Cool. And after a few days asking this question, one woman finally, the men didn't say anything. One woman said, well, you know what the fear is? That if we are virgins, we'll be raped. But if we are married off, they'll think blah, blah, blah. Cool. All right. Now, this book and that search for that started because I had married a Muslim woman and a Pakistani when countries were at war with each other, and I was put on a hit list. When I was reading out this part, a woman asked, what is your wife's side of the story on this? Which I thought was a fair question. But my answer was, that's for my wife to tell. I'm not going to be telling that story. Cool? So in that same way, I think it's only fair, not just logical actually, but fair, that Jhumpa Lahiri's story or Kiran Desai's story, Kiran, our younger sister, is somewhere around here, should be different from mine. Not because I want to be representing every side of the equation. That liberal dream is not mine. Mine is a much more flawed and limited, but in my personal opinion, more honest view of trying to present my situation as clearly as possible, in all its dilemmas and all its contradictions, some of them very dangerous and damaging contradictions, because the luxury of assuming every position and trying to be fair is for me an illusion. I would rather be honest and present in all its damaged form the position that I occupy. So that's my answer.
All right.